The siren blared incessantly in Eli's ears as he struggled to maintain control of the careening spacecraft. The supply ship's navigation system flashed red warnings across the cockpit display, indicating critical damage to the left engine. Systems failing. All crew to emergency positions, shouted Captain Marquez over the comm system before it cut out completely. Eli's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to stabilize their descent toward the looming purple-hued planet below. This was supposed to be a routine supply run along the Outer Rim territories. They hadn't expected to encounter Velian warships this far from their empire. The warning shot had come without communication, a bright pulse of energy that tore through their propulsion system. Now, they were plummeting toward Velian territory with no way to stop it. Engineering report. Eli called out, but received only static in response. A violent shudder ran through the ship as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Metal screamed against the heat and pressure. Eli strapped himself tighter into the pilot's chair and prepared for impact. The landscape below grew larger, crystalline forests and sprawling purple plains rushing up to meet them. Then darkness. Eli awoke to the acrid smell of burnt circuitry and the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. Smoke hung thick in the air of the shattered cockpit. He unclasped his safety harness with trembling fingers and pulled himself from the chair, wincing at the sharp pain in his ribs. "Marquez? Stevens?" he called out, stumbling through the twisted corridors of what remained of their ship. "Anyone?" His calls were met with devastating silence. At the crew quarters, he found only destruction. His 7 crewmates, his friends, lay motionless among the wreckage. He checked each for signs of life, but found none. Eli sank to his knees in grief and shock. He was alone on a hostile planet, the sole survivor of a disaster that should never have happened. A sudden noise outside the ship snapped him back to attention. Voices speaking a language he didn't recognize. Heavy footsteps. The unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. He scrambled for the emergency kit, retrieving a small translator device and a basic medical pack. There was no time to mourn his friends now. Survival came first. When the Velian soldiers breached the hull of his ship, Eli raised his hands in surrender. 10 tall, humanoid figures in gleaming armor surrounded him, their skin a pale lavender hue, their eyes entirely black except for pinpricks of white light at the center. Their weapons, energy spears that crackled with power, were aimed directly at his chest. "I come in peace," Eli said, the translator on his wrist converting his words into a series of musical tones. The tallest soldier stepped forward, regarding Eli with cold curiosity. "Human," he said, the universal translator rendering his speech in Eli's native tongue. "You have violated Velian space. The penalty is death." Heavy restraints were clamped around Eli's wrists before he could protest. They dragged him from the wreckage of his ship and into a transport vessel that hovered nearby. Through the viewport, Eli watched as smaller Velian ships descended upon the crash site, likely to salvage any useful technology. The journey to the Velian capital was brief, but uncomfortable. Eli was kept in a holding cell, his requests for medical attention ignored. When they finally landed, he was marched out into blinding daylight. The Velian royal palace dominated the skyline, a massive structure of crystalline spires and floating platforms that defied gravity itself. The architecture was both beautiful and intimidating, much like the Velians themselves. The soldiers escorted Eli through vast corridors of polished stone and living metal that seemed to pulse with energy. Velian nobles and servants stopped to stare at him as he passed, their expressions ranging from disgust to morbid fascination. Finally, they arrived at the throne room, a cavernous chamber with a high, domed ceiling that displayed what looked like a real-time map of the stars. 2 massive thrones, made of some iridescent material, sat upon a raised platform. One was occupied by a regal-looking Velian with deep purple skin and an elaborate headdress that suggested supreme authority. "Emperor Zolter, we present the human trespasser," announced the captain of the guard, shoving Eli forward. The emperor regarded Eli with cold calculation. So this is what survived the crash, he said, his voice deep and resonant. Pitiful. Standing beside the Emperor's throne was a tall female, Velian dressed in ornate armor. Her features bore a striking resemblance to the Emperor, though her skin was a lighter shade of purple and her eyes held a particular cruelty. "Father, why waste time with this creature?" she asked, her lips curled in disdain. "The human colonies need to learn the consequences of encroaching on our space." "Patience, Aya," the Emperor replied. "A public execution will send a stronger message than simply disposing of it." Eli stepped forward, ignoring the painful jab of a guard's spear. "Your Highness, I mean no disrespect, but our ship was on a peaceful mission. We were delivering medical supplies to the Cygnus colony when we were shot down without warning." Murmurs rippled through the assembled court. The Emperor's expression remained unchanged, but Princess Aya's face contorted with rage. "Lies," she spat. "Humans know our territories are forbidden. Your kind are nothing but expansionist vermin." The tension in the room was palpable when a side door opened and a smaller figure entered. Another female Velian, dressed in simple but elegant robes of deep blue, moved quietly into the throne room. Unlike the others, her demeanor was reserved, almost shy. The room fell silent as she approached the throne and bowed deeply. "Varelia," the Emperor acknowledged his younger daughter with notably less warmth than he'd shown Aya. "What brings you to court? You rarely grace us with your presence." "I heard about the human ship, Father," Varelia said, her voice soft but clear. "I was curious." She turned to look at Eli, and he was struck by how different her eyes were from the others, still mostly black, but with larger white centers that gave her a more expressive appearance. She seemed to be studying him with genuine interest rather than contempt. "Another of your scientific curiosities, sister?" Princess Aya sneered, always fascinated by the lesser species. Varelia didn't respond to her sister's taunt. Instead, she addressed her father directly. "Father, instead of executing this human, perhaps he could serve a purpose. I would like to request him as a gift." Laughter erupted throughout the court. The Emperor himself chuckled, a cold sound devoid of actual humor. "A gift? What use would you have for a human pet?" Varelia stood her ground, though Eli noticed her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "My research, Father. Human biology has certain, unique aspects that could prove valuable to my studies. Studies that have yet to bear any fruit." Aya interjected sharply. The Emperor considered for a moment, then waved his hand dismissively. "Very well. Take the human if you wish. A fitting gift for the barren princess, a creature as useless as she is." More laughter followed, cruel and mocking. Eli saw Varelia flinch at her father's words, but she quickly composed herself and bowed again. "Thank you, Father." Guards unfastened Eli's restraints from the floor, but left the cuffs on his wrists. A gentle pressure on his arm guided him to follow Varelia as she turned and left the throne room with as much dignity as she could muster. They walked in silence through a series of corridors, moving away from the opulent central palace toward what appeared to be a more secluded wing. Varelia dismissed the guards at a certain point, assuring them she could handle the human alone. When they finally reached her private chambers, Eli was surprised by the stark contrast to the rest of the palace. Where most of the royal residence was ostentatious and grand, Varelia's quarters were simple, almost austere. The rooms were filled with books, strange instruments, and what looked like scientific equipment. Large windows overlooked a garden of luminescent plants that pulsed gently in the twilight. Once the door closed behind them, Varelia turned to Eli and produced a small device that she used to unlock his restraints. "I apologize for my father and sister," she said in carefully pronounced English, surprising Eli with her knowledge of his language. "Their cruelty is customary." Eli rubbed his sore wrists, eyeing her warily. "Why did you help me?" "I did not save you from kindness alone," she admitted, moving to a cabinet and retrieving what looked like a medical kit. "Though I would not wish execution on any sentient being. But I do have genuine interest in your species." She gestured to a simple chair. "Please sit. You're injured." Eli hesitated, then complied. He had little choice but to trust her for now. "So, I'm to be your research subject? Your pet?" he asked bitterly as she began to clean a cut on his forehead with surprising gentleness. Virelia's eyes met his, and he saw something in them that he hadn't expected: sadness and perhaps a flicker of loneliness. "You are not my pet," she said quietly. "I saved your life. In return, I hope for your cooperation. But you are not my prisoner." "What does that mean?" "I can leave." "Leave to where?" "To be captured and executed by my father's guards." She shook her head. "For now, you must stay here where I can protect you. In time, perhaps we can find a better solution." As she continued to tend to his wounds, Eli studied her more closely. Despite her alien features, her expressions were remarkably human-like: concern, concentration, a flash of sympathy. "Why did your father call?" "You, Baron," Eli asked, immediately regretting his bluntness when her hands stilled momentarily. Varelia resumed her work, her voice measured. "Among Velians, the ability to continue the royal bloodline is everything. I cannot bear children. This makes me worthless in my father's eyes." She applied a strange, cooling gel to a burn on his arm. "That is why they laugh when I ask for you. The useless princess and her useless pet human." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, but there was something else too: a quiet defiance. "I'm sorry," Eli said, and meant it. Varelia looked surprised at his sympathy, then offered a small smile, the first he'd seen from any Velian. "Rest now," she said, gesturing to an adjacent room with what appeared to be sleeping quarters. "Tomorrow we will begin." "Begin what?" Eli asked. "Finding out why I truly cannot bear children," she replied enigmatically. "And perhaps, human, you may find your own path home." As Eli settled into the surprisingly comfortable bed in the small chamber off Virelia's main rooms, his mind raced with the day's events. The crash, his lost crewmates, his narrow escape from execution, and now this strange arrangement with the Velian princess. He had no reason to trust her, yet something in her demeanor, so different from the other Velians, gave him hope. Outside his window, 2 moons hung in the alien sky, one large and pale blue, the other smaller and with a reddish tint. As exhaustion finally overcame him, Eli's last thought was of the sadness in Virelia's strange eyes and the feeling that both of them were somehow prisoners in different ways. Days passed in a strange routine. Varelia would leave early each morning, presumably for obligatory royal duties, while Eli remained confined to her quarters. Guards brought food, strange but palatable alien fare, and occasionally Varelia would bring him books or data tablets to alleviate his boredom. When she returned in the evenings, she would often bring additional supplies: medical tools, data crystals, and occasionally small pieces of technology that she would ask him to explain. His background as an engineer proved useful in these exchanges, and slowly a tentative trust began to build between them. Eli learned quickly that the Velian Empire operated on strict hierarchical principles. The royal bloodline was considered sacred, with genetic purity being paramount. Half-breeds of any kind were considered abominations, and interspecies relationships were not just taboo, but criminal. He also learned that Varelia was something of an outcast in her own family, not just because of her inability to bear children, but because of her interest in science and other cultures, which many traditional Velians consider beneath their dignity. The High Council believes we have reached the pinnacle of evolution, Varelia explained one evening as they sat in her study, surrounded by ancient texts and modern data displays. They see no need for further advancement or exchange with other species. "But you disagree," Eli observed. She nodded, her eyes lighting up with rare animation. "The universe is vast and full of knowledge. How can we claim superiority when we refuse to learn from others?" These conversations became the highlight of Eli's captivity. Varelia was intelligent and curious, and despite her reserved demeanor, she possessed a quiet passion for knowledge that Eli found captivating. One evening, after they had been discussing human propulsion technology, Varelia suddenly changed the subject. "Would you be willing to help me with something personal?" she asked, uncharacteristic hesitation in her voice. "That depends on what it is," Eli replied cautiously. "I would like to show you something, but we must go at night when the palace is quiet." Later that night, when the main palace activities had ceased, Varelia led Eli through a series of hidden passages. They descended several levels below her quarters until they reached what appeared to be an ancient section of the palace. "The old scientific wing," Varelia explained in a whisper, "abandoned centuries ago when the spiritual faction gained power in court." She pressed her palm against a weathered door, which recognized her royal biopattern and slid open with a faint hiss. Inside was a laboratory unlike anything Eli had seen in the palace so far. Ancient Velian technology merged with newer components that Varelia had apparently salvaged and integrated herself. "This is where I conduct my real research," she said, activating the systems with a wave of her hand. Holographic displays illuminated the space with a soft blue glow. "Few know this place exists anymore." "What exactly are you researching?" Eli asked, examining the strange equipment. Varelia hesitated, then pulled up a detailed holographic display of what Eli recognized as DNA structures, though with alien configurations. "My own genetic code," she revealed. "I've been studying it for years, trying to understand why I cannot conceive. The royal physicians declared it a natural defect, but I discovered something troubling." She manipulated the display to highlight a specific sequence. "This section here, it's not natural. It's been artificially modified." Eli stepped closer, fascinated despite not fully understanding the alien genetics. "You're saying someone deliberately made you infertile? Who would do that?" "Someone who feared what my children might bring," Varelia said solemnly. "I was born during the Red Comet alignment, a celestial event that occurs once every 1,000 years. There is an ancient prophecy that says the child born under the red star will overthrow the throne and usher in a new age." "And you think your father, or the high priests?" Varelia nodded. "Someone ensured I would never bear the child of prophecy." Eli studied the genetic display, his engineer's mind already analyzing the problem from a technical perspective. "This sequence here," he pointed, "it reminds me of biogenetic locks we've developed for preventing unauthorized replication of engineered organisms. If it is artificial, then, theoretically, it could be unlocked," Varelia finished, excitement evident in her voice. They spent hours in the hidden lab, Eli bringing his human perspective to Varelia's years of research. His expertise in engineering systems offered a fresh approach to what Varelia had always viewed as a purely biological problem. "It's like a mechanical lock with biological components," Eli explained, sketching a diagram on a datapad. "If we can create the right key, perhaps using nanobots programmed to target just this sequence." Varelia's eyes widened. "I have been working on medical nanobots, but never considered using them this way." As dawn approached, they reluctantly returned to Varelia's quarters, having made more progress in one night than Varelia had in years of solitary research. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new routine. Days were spent maintaining appearances, Varelia attending court functions while Eli remained in her quarters, but nights were dedicated to their secret work in the laboratory. They combined Velian biotechnology with human engineering principles, creating a nanobot treatment that might unlock Varelia's modified genes. During these late-night sessions, their conversations often drifted beyond science to more personal matters. Eli spoke of Earth, his family, and the friends he had lost in the crash. Varelia shared stories of her childhood, of growing up in the shadow of her father's disappointment and her sister's cruelty. "Aya was not always so harsh," Varelia confided one night as they calibrated the nanobots. "When we were very young, she would protect me from father's criticisms. But as we grew older and it became clear I would never be the princess he wanted, she distanced herself. Better to align with power than to show compassion for the weak." "You're not weak," Eli said firmly, surprising both of them with his vehemence. "You're the most intelligent person I've met on this planet, and the only one with the courage to question your society's assumptions." Varelia looked away, but not before Eli caught the hint of a smile. These moments of connection had become increasingly frequent, a warmth growing between them that neither acknowledged explicitly. Their work progressed steadily, but not without challenges. Twice they had close calls with palace guards patrolling near the laboratory, and once Princess Aya nearly discovered Eli when she made an unexpected visit to Varelia's quarters. The constant secrecy took its toll, particularly on Varelia, who had to maintain a facade of normalcy at court while carrying the weight of their clandestine project. One evening, Aya confronted Varelia after a royal banquet, cornering her in a deserted corridor. "You've been absent from court functions more than usual, sister," Aya said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "And the guards report strange noises from your quarters at night." "I've been focused on my studies," Varelia replied evenly. "Nothing that would interest you or father." Aya stepped closer, her tall frame looming over Varelia. "Is this about the human? I've seen how you look at it during the few times you've brought it to court. Like it's more than just a research subject. I don't know what you're implying, but..." "Don't play naive," Aya hissed. "Whatever you're planning with that creature, be warned. I'm watching you. If you bring shame to our bloodline, I won't protect you, sister or not." After Aya stalked away, Varelia returned to her quarters shaken. She recounted the confrontation to Eli, who shared her concern. "She suspects something," he said grimly. "We need to accelerate our timeline." They worked through the night with renewed urgency, finalizing the nanobot treatment. By dawn, they had created what they believed would work, a one-time injection that would target the artificial genetic lock without damaging Varelia's natural DNA. "It's ready," Eli said, holding up a vial of silvery liquid. "But Varelia, you should know the risks. This is untested. If something goes wrong..." "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "But I must try, not just to defy those who did this to me, but to reclaim what was taken, my choice, my future." Eli prepared the injection while Varelia sat on the laboratory's examination table, extending her arm with surprising calm. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "thank you, Eli. You've given me hope when I had none." He nodded, unable to express the tumult of emotions her words evoked. With careful precision, he administered the injection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Varelia gasped, her body suddenly rigid with pain. A strange luminescence appeared beneath her skin, tracing the path of her veins in patterns of blue light. She collapsed backward, convulsing. "Varelia!" Eli caught her, panic rising in his chest. The monitoring equipment blared warnings as her vital signs fluctuated wildly. For several terrifying minutes, Eli could do nothing but hold her and watch the battle raging within her body. The nanobots were working, fighting to dismantle the genetic lock, but the process was far more violent than they had anticipated. Finally, the convulsions subsided. The blue light faded, and Varelia lay still, her breathing shallow but steady. Eli carried her to a recovery couch in the corner of the lab, his heart pounding with fear that they had miscalculated terribly. As he anxiously monitored her vital signs, he failed to notice a shadow passing briefly across one of the lab's small ventilation grates, a silent observer who had witnessed everything. Hours later, Varelia awoke with a gasp, her eyes flying open. Eli, who had been dozing in a chair beside her, jerked awake. "How do you feel?" he asked, immediately checking her vitals on the nearby monitor. Varelia sat up slowly, a look of wonder spreading across her face. "Different," she whispered. "I feel whole." A quick scan confirmed what they both hoped. The nanobots had successfully disabled the genetic lock. In theory, Varelia was now capable of bearing children. "It worked," Eli said, relief and pride mingling in his voice. "Your reproductive system should function normally now." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of what they had accomplished together, and perhaps something more. The moment was interrupted by an urgent beeping from the lab security system. "Someone's coming," Varelia said, instantly alert. "We need to leave. Now." They quickly powered down the equipment and slipped out through a hidden exit, barely avoiding a squad of royal guards who entered the lab moments after they left. As they made their way back to Virelia's quarters through seldom-used passages, Eli couldn't shake the feeling they were being followed. Their suspicions were confirmed 3 nights later when a team of assassins breached Virelia's chambers. Eli awoke to the sound of shattering glass and Virelia's warning cry. 6 masked figures in black armor swarmed into the room, weapons drawn. "The Emperor wants this handled quietly," one of them said. "No evidence." Eli grabbed a decorative staff from the wall. A poor weapon, but better than nothing. Virelia seized a small device from her bedside table that emitted a disabling pulse when activated. They fought desperately against the superior force. Eli managed to knock 2 attackers unconscious, while Virelia's device temporarily incapacitated another. But they were outnumbered and cornered, with 3 assassins still advancing. The leader raised his weapon for a killing blow against Eli when a brilliant flash of energy cut through the room. 2 of the remaining assassins fell instantly. The leader turned in shock only to be struck down by another energy blast. Princess Aya stood in the doorway, an advanced pulse weapon in her hands, her expression unreadable. "Aya," Virelia stammered, as stunned by her sister's intervention as by the attack itself. "You fools," Aya addressed the fallen assassins, though only one remained conscious enough to hear. "Killing a royal while with child is high treason, no matter who ordered it." Virelia's hand went instinctively to her abdomen, her eyes wide with shock. "How did you? I had you monitored after our conversation," Aya said coolly. "I saw everything in the laboratory. Though I admit I didn't expect the treatment to work so quickly." "Elistepted protectivelu closer torstai Virelia. Why would you help us?" Aya's expression hardened. "I didn't do it for you, human. Despite everything, she is my sister and a royal princess. And now she carries royal blood, even if it is tainted." She looked at Virelia. "Father has gone too far. Assassinating his own daughter violates our most sacred laws." "What happens now?" Virelia asked, still processing her sister's unexpected intervention. "Now," Aya said grimly, "you face father. I've already summoned the royal council. They must witness what he has attempted here tonight." Within an hour, Virelia and Eli stood before Emperor Zoltar and the assembled court. The throne room buzzed with tension as Aya presented the surviving assassin, who confirmed under duress that the Emperor himself had ordered the killing. "This is preposterous," the Emperor thundered. "The human has corrupted my daughter's mind with lies. It is a spy, a saboteur sent to undermine our empire. Then explain why your personal guard attempted to murder a royal princess in her chambers," Aya challenged, her voice carrying across the stunned court. Eli watched the power dynamics shift before his eyes. Many of the nobles looked horrified at the assassination attempt, regardless of their feelings about humans. The sanctity of royal blood was a cornerstone of their culture. The Emperor, sensing his position weakening, changed tactics. "The human will be executed immediately. I will hear no further arguments." Guards moved toward Eli, but Virelia stepped between them and her father. "If you kill him," she announced, her voice clear and steady, "you kill the father of your grandchild." A deafening silence fell over the throne room. The Emperor's face drained of color, while gasps and murmurs spread through the assembled nobles. "Impossible," the Emperor finally hissed. "You cannot bear children. And even if you could, a half-breed abomination is still of royal blood," interrupted an elderly Velian in ceremonial robes, the high priest of the royal temple. "Your Majesty, if the princess speaks truth, her child is protected by our most ancient laws, regardless of its parentage." "I carry a child," Virelia stated firmly. "Your physicians can confirm it. And this child, half human, half Velian, is the embodiment of the prophecy you feared so much that you alter my very genes to prevent it." The revelation sent shockwaves through the court. The Emperor, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, rose from his throne. "I will not allow this perversion," he shouted. "Guards, separate them." But to everyone's surprise, many of the royal guards hesitated, looking uncertainly between the Emperor and the high priest, who shook his head solemnly. To harm a pregnant royal is sacrilege, the priest declared. Even the emperor is bound by this law. With a final look of pure hatred at Eli and Varelia, the emperor stormed from the throne room, followed by his loyalists. The remaining court erupted in chaotic discussion, divided between those horrified by the idea of a half-human royal child and those equally appalled by the emperor's actions against his own daughter. In the days that followed, the palace became a hotbed of political maneuvering. The emperor, while temporarily checked by religious law, began gathering allies for what everyone expected would be a final purge of Varelia and Eli once the initial shock had passed. Princess Aya maintained a calculated neutrality, protecting her sister from immediate harm while carefully avoiding any appearance of outright rebellion against their father. The high priest, whether out of genuine religious conviction or political opportunism, became an unexpected ally, declaring the unborn child a sign from the stars themselves. Varelia and Eli, now under the protection of temple guards rather than royal ones, used this time to solidify their position. Varelia revealed evidence of her father's genetic tampering to select members of the royal council. Medical records, witness testimonies from servants, and data from their research. Word of the scandal spread beyond the palace walls. The Velian populace, long accustomed to the emperor's harsh rule but respectful of royal tradition, began to whisper of change. Some saw Varelia's human hybrid child as an abomination, but others, particularly the younger generation and those from the outer provinces, viewed it as a symbol of necessary evolution for their increasingly isolated empire. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. The emperor, having secured the loyalty of the military commander and a significant portion of the army, planned a midnight coup to seize Varelia and Eli under the pretext of quarantining a biological threat. He might have succeeded had it not been for a royal food taster, a servant who had always been treated kindly by Varelia, who overheard the plan and warned them hours before it was to be executed. With little time to prepare, Varelia made a bold decision. Rather than flee or hide, she would confront her father publicly, where his actions would be witnessed by all. Using an ancient royal privilege, she triggered the Great Assembly, a seldom-used protocol that summoned all citizens to the palace grounds to hear a royal proclamation. By law, this summons could not be denied, even by the emperor himself. As thousands gathered in the massive central plaza of the palace, Varelia appeared on the traditional speaker's platform, Eli at her side. Her simple royal robes stood in stark contrast to the elaborate regalia her father typically wore. The emperor, forced by tradition to attend, watched with barely contained fury from his elevated royal box. "People of Velian," Varelia began, her voice amplified across the plaza, "I come before you not just as your princess, but as a daughter of our world who has seen both its greatness and its flaws." She proceeded to lay out everything: the prophecy, her father's genetic manipulation, the assassination attempts, and finally, the truth about her child. As evidence, she displayed holographic projections of her medical records and the emperor's secret orders. "For too long, we have closed ourselves off from the galaxy, believing ourselves superior to all other species," she continued. "But in doing so, we have stagnated. The prophecy speaks not of destruction, but of renewal. My child, yes, half-human, represents not a dilution of our greatness, but its evolution." The crowd's reaction was mixed: shock, outrage, confusion, but also growing murmurs of support, particularly from the younger Velians and those who had long suffered under the emperor's harsh policies. The emperor, seeing his authority slipping away, made a desperate final move. He stood suddenly, raising an ornate weapon that none had seen him carry into the assembly. "This abomination ends now," he snarled, aiming at Varelia. Several things happened at once. Temple guards moved to protect Varelia. Eli threw himself toward her. And most surprisingly, Princess Aya, seated near her father, lunged for his arm, deflecting the weapon's discharge harmlessly into the air. "Enough, father," Aya shouted, struggling with him as guards rushed to intervene. "You have become the very threat you claim to protect us from." The public attempt on Virelia's life, witnessed by thousands, was the final breaking point. Royal guards, already divided in their loyalties, sided decisively with the princesses. The emperor was restrained, still shouting threats and condemnations as he was led away. In the tumultuous days that followed, the royal council convened an emergency session. After hours of debate, they reached a decision that would forever change Velian society. Emperor Zoltar would be removed from the throne and placed in permanent exile on a remote Velian outpost. The question of succession, however, proved more contentious. By tradition, Aya, as the eldest, should take the throne, but many counselors argued that Virelia had demonstrated the vision and courage needed to lead their people into a new era. The sister surprised everyone by proposing a compromise, a temporary dual regency until Virelia's child came of age, at which point a new form of governance would be established, one that balanced tradition with progress. 3 months later, in a ceremony that blended ancient Velian rituals with newly created elements, Virelia was crowned as the principal regent. Eli stood beside her not as consort or king, but as first advisor, a deliberately ambiguous title that acknowledges importance without directly challenging Velian hierarchical traditions. The coronation took place in the Great Temple rather than the throne room, symbolizing a shift away from absolute monarchy toward a more spiritually and ethically guided leadership. Princess Aya, in a gesture few would have predicted months earlier, personally placed the regent's circlet on her sister's head. The stars have guided us to this moment. Virelia addressed the assembled dignitaries and citizens after her coronation, not to an ending, but to a beginning. Together, we will build a Velian empire that honors our past while embracing a future where we take our rightful place among the galactic community, not as conquerors or isolationists, but as innovators and allies. That night, as celebrations continued throughout the capital, Virelia and Eli stood on the private balcony of what had once been her modest quarters and was now the regent's residence. Above them, the 2 moons of Velian shone brightly, and between them, faintly visible, was the red star that had featured in the prophecy. "Do you think we'll succeed?" Eli asked, his hand gently resting over hers on the balcony rail. Changing an entire empire's way of thinking won't happen overnight. Virelia smiled, placing her free hand on her growing abdomen where their child, the impossible prophesied child, continued to develop. "No great change ever happens overnight," she said. "But it always begins with a single moment, a single choice to believe that something better is possible." Eli drew her close, still marveling at how natural it felt to hold her despite their physiological differences. "When I crashed on this planet, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined I'd find this." "Nor did I," Virelia replied softly. "I spent my life accepting that I was flawed, incomplete, a princess with no future to offer. Now I carry the future within me." Below them, the lights of the capital city twinkled, reflecting the stars above. Reports had been coming in all day of celebrations, not just in the capital, but in provinces across the empire. Change brought fear, yes, but also hope, especially for those who had long lived under Emperor Zoltar's harsh rule. "Aya surprised me today," Eli remarked, thinking of the elder princess's dignified behavior during the coronation. "I never thought she'd accept me, or us." Virelia's expression turned thoughtful. "My sister is complicated. She was raised to be the perfect heir, to never question, never show weakness. But beneath that, there's always been a core of something stronger than mere obedience. I think perhaps she's been waiting for permission to be more than what our father demanded." "And the child? Will she accept her niece or nephew?" "Time will tell," Virelia said. "But I believe she will. Despite everything, we are family." A soft chime interrupted their conversation, a communication from the royal physician requesting a routine check on Virelia's pregnancy. The hybrid nature of their child meant that every stage of development was being carefully monitored. "The doctor can wait until morning," Virelia decided, turning her face up to the moons. "Tonight is for us, and for the future we're building." 6 months later, As the red star reached its zenith in the Velian sky, Varlia gave birth to a daughter. The labor was difficult, testing the limits of both Velian and human medical knowledge, but mother and child emerged healthy and strong. The infant princess was a true blend of her parents. Her skin a soft, pale lavender, her eyes human in shape, but with the distinctive Velian coloration of mostly black with white centers. Most striking were the tiny, luminescent markings that traced delicate patterns along her temples and the backs of her hands, a feature previously unknown in either species. Eli held his daughter with trembling hands, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Varlia watched them with exhausted joy from her recovery bed. "She's perfect," Eli whispered, marveling at the tiny fingers that gripped his own with surprising strength. "She is the beginning," Varlia agreed. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but never reached a decision. Now, looking at his daughter's face, Eli knew instinctively what she should be called. "Aurora," he suggested. "On Earth, it's the name of the lights that dance in the northern skies, a meeting place between our world and the stars." "Aurora," Varlia repeated, tasting the name. "Yes, in our ancient language, a similar word means the dawn after darkness." "It's perfect." Princess Aya, who had been waiting outside during the birth, entered the room with uncharacteristic hesitation. She approached the bed slowly, her gaze fixed on the newborn. "May I see her?" she asked, a vulnerability in her voice that Eli had never heard before. Carefully, he transferred Aurora to her aunt's arms. Aya held the child with surprising tenderness, studying her features with intense curiosity. "She has the royal birthmark," Aya noted, indicating a small crescent-shaped marking behind the baby's ear that both she and Varlia shared. "The blood runs true, even mixed with other elements." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was a beginning. News of Aurora's birth spread quickly throughout the Empire and beyond. Representatives from nearby systems, some curious, some cautious, some genuinely supportive, sent envoys to the capital. The human colonies, initially skeptical of reports that one of their own had become consort to a Velian regent, dispatched a diplomatic mission that arrived 2 months after Aurora's birth. The human ambassador, a dignified woman named Lydia Shun, was clearly stunned when introduced to Eli, whom many on Earth had presumed dead after his ship's disappearance. "Your family will be overjoyed," she told him during a private meeting. "Everyone thought you were lost with the rest of the crew." The mention of his crew brought a familiar pang of grief to Eli's heart. "I was the only survivor," he said quietly. "The others never had a chance." Ambassador Shun nodded solemnly. "We suspected as much when the emergency beacon was activated, but no communication followed. But now," she gestured at the palace around them, "to find you not only alive, but instrumental in what might be the most significant diplomatic breakthrough with the Velian Empire in centuries. It's extraordinary." "It wasn't planned," Eli admitted with a small smile. "But sometimes the universe has its own ideas." The ambassador's expression turned serious. "The question now is what happens next. Your presence here, your child, they change everything about our relationship with the Velians. Some in the human government are concerned, others see opportunity." "And what do you see, Ambassador?" She considered the question carefully. "I see a bridge where there was once only a wall. But bridges can be crossed in both directions, and not everyone may have peaceful intentions." Her warning proved prescient. As Aurora grew from infant to toddler, bringing joy to the palace with her curious nature and infectious laughter, political challenges mounted both within and beyond the empire. A faction of traditionalist Velians, led by former allies of Emperor Zoltar, began spreading propaganda against the dilution of royal blood. They claimed the prophecy had been misinterpreted, that the half-human child would bring destruction rather than renewal. From a human side, certain military and corporate interests saw the changed relationship with the Velians as an opportunity to access their advanced technology and resource-rich territories. They pressured their government to take a more aggressive stance in negotiations, using Eli's presence as leverage. Amid these growing tensions, Varlia and Eli worked tirelessly to build a foundation for lasting peace. They established cultural exchange programs, joint scientific ventures, and gradually reformed the more xenophobic aspects of Velian society. Progress was slow but steady, each small success building toward their vision of a more open, equitable empire. Princess Aya, somewhat to everyone's surprise, proved to be a valuable ally in these efforts. While she maintained a more conservative public stance than Varelia, her behind-the-scenes diplomacy helped win over many of the traditional noble houses. Her relationship with her niece, Aurora, grew increasingly affectionate, and she became one of the child's most dedicated protectors. On Aurora's third birthday, celebrated with a festival that combined Velian traditions with elements of Earth culture, a more personal challenge arose. The exiled Emperor Zoltar, who had been largely silent during his banishment, somehow managed to send a message directly to the palace. "The abomination grows stronger," the message read. "But remember, daughter, what has been unlocked can be locked again. Your joy is built on shifting sands." The threat was clear, particularly to Varelia and Eli, who understood its deeper meaning. If Zoltar still had access to the technology that had altered Varelia's genetics, he might attempt to use it against Aurora. "We should increase security," Aya insisted when informed of the message. "The old fool may be in exile, but he still has supporters who could act on his behalf." "Security isn't enough," Eli argued. "We need to find out who's still loyal to him, who might be helping him communicate." Varelia, who had been quietly contemplating the message, finally spoke. "This isn't just about protection. It's about truth. It's time our people knew exactly what my father did, not just to me, but potentially to others." Her suggestion was radical. A complete disclosure of Emperor Zoltar's genetic manipulation program, which their investigations had revealed was far more extensive than initially believed. Over decades, he had ordered the subtle genetic modification of various nobles and officials who showed traits he considered undesirable or threatening. The revelation could destabilize the entire social order, Aya warned. Many of our most prominent families could discover they've been tampered with without their knowledge. And if we say nothing, those same families remain vulnerable, Varelia countered. "Father's threat isn't just against Aurora. It's against anyone who stands against his vision of Velian purity." The debate continued for days, with valid concerns on all sides. Ultimately, they reached a compromise, a controlled disclosure to the High Council and affected families, coupled with an offer of screening and, where possible, reversal treatments based on the nanobot technology Eli and Varelia had pioneered. The revelations sent shockwaves through Velian society, just as Aya had predicted. Several prominent noble houses discovered that their lineages had been subtly altered over generations to ensure compliance with the emperor's will. Religious leaders were horrified by the sacrilege against what they considered divinely ordained genetics. Military leaders questioned whether their loyalty had been engineered rather than earned. Yet from this chaos emerged an unexpected unity. Families who had been rivals for centuries found common cause in their anger at the manipulation. The myth of Velian genetic superiority, already weakened by Aurora's healthy development, cracked further as people realized how artificial many of their supposed natural traits were. 6 months after the disclosure, Varelia stood before the Great Assembly once again. This time, she proposed a new governing charter, one that would transform the Velian Empire from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one, with elected representatives serving alongside hereditary nobles. "For too long, we have been told that our worth lies in our blood, in genetic purity and ancient lineages," she told the assembled citizens. "But my father's actions have shown us the lie in this belief. Our worth lies in our choices, our actions, our capacity for growth and change." She gestured to Aurora, now old enough to stand beside her parents for short public appearances, proudly holding both their hands. "Look at my daughter, neither fully Velian nor fully human, yet perfect in her uniqueness. She reminds us that our strength comes not from isolation, but from connection, not from purity, but from diversity." The new charter passed with overwhelming support, marking the beginning of the most significant governmental reforms in Velian history. The transition would not be easy, but it had begun. That evening, as became their custom on significant days, Varelia and Eli stood on their balcony, watching the moon's rise. Aurora had been put to bed after the excitement of the day, but not before insisting on hearing yet again the story of how her parents met, a tale that made her giggle every time at the thought of her mother asking for her father as a gift. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your ship hadn't crashed here?" Varelia asked, breaking a comfortable silence. Eli considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have completed my mission, returned to Earth, continued my ordinary life, never knowing what I was missing." He smiled at her. "But then I think about how many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other, and it feels less like an accident and more like destiny." Varelia supplied with a teasing smile. The concept had always seemed too mystical for Eli's scientific mind. "I was going to say statistical improbability," he laughed. "But yes, destiny works too." Below them, the capital city gleamed with lights. In the distance, a ship was taking off, one of the new joint Villian-human vessels developed through their technology exchange program. Its engines glowed briefly before it vanished into the night sky, headed for the stars. "Aurora asked me today if she could visit Earth someday," Varelia said. "She wants to see oceans and forests and all the things from your stories." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that someday we would go together, as a family. That her existence has opened doors between worlds that once seemed permanently closed." Eli pulled Varelia closer, marveling as he often did at how far they had come from their first meeting. From prisoner and captor to partners in a revolution neither of them had planned, but both had embraced. "From gift to family," he murmured. "Not the journey I expected when I set out on that supply run." "The best journeys rarely are," Varelia replied, resting her head against his shoulder as they gazed up at the stars. No longer barriers between worlds, but bridges connecting them. In the royal nursery, Aurora slept peacefully, the genetic heritage of two worlds flowing harmoniously through her veins. Above her bed, a mobile of stars and planets turned slowly, casting gentle shadows on the wall. Earth and Villian side by side, no longer separated by fear and prejudice, but united by what they might become together. And somewhere in the vast darkness between those worlds, the red comet continued its ancient journey through the cosmos, its prophecy fulfilled not in destruction, but in creation, not in ending, but in beginning.